A very good evening to you and welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. South Africa's unemployment rate has reached a new record high with no evidence that things are going to get better anytime soon. We speak to business organizations about what needs to be done, as well as other organizations that have been highlighting and breaking the barriers as they try to help young people and women especially get employed. After them, Pan-African Psychology Union President Dr. Seth Cooper talks about the always neglected psychosocial impact of joblessness on people, especially young people. The Watchdog starts now. To get us started, here's an insert by our business and economics reporter, Gloria Sefakomusi.
Most South Africans continue to lose their jobs, while many others have given up looking for work. The expanded definition of unemployment, which includes discouraged job seekers, stands at 44.4%. Rising unemployment shows businesses are continuing to battle the impact of COVID-19, and in many cases, they were forced to cut staff to stay afloat. Sectors that have shed the most jobs are finance, government services, and manufacturing. Data shows that the younger you are with limited experience, the more you are unlikely to find employment. The less qualifications you have, the less chances that you will be able to get employed. And if you are a woman, then the odds against you are stacked even higher.
So the 7.8 million people are unemployed as actively looking for employment. The 3.3 million people are your discouraged work seekers, but we also have another 800,000 people who didn't look for employment for other reasons other than discouragement. And when we bring those together, we come to 11.9 million, which brings our unemployment rate to 44.4%.
One such South African struggling to find employment is Ntando Matebula, who hails from Hazyview in Mpumalanga. After completing an engineering design qualification, he struggled to find work. He survived by doing part-time jobs not related to his field of study, which he says would last for about 3 months at a time. Feeling discouraged, he decided to study further and follow his passion of working in film and television. After securing yet another qualification, he's again struggling to find work. He says he cannot go back home to the rural areas as there are better chances of getting a job in Gauteng. But he also cannot afford a place of his own in Gauteng, and his family back home is counting on him finding a job so that he can be able to help them. Matebula is squatting at a friend's place, hoping for an opportunity to come along, but he admits things are hard.
Family income, it also pressing me down when it comes to looking for a job, because sometimes I might maybe ask for maybe money for transport. Maybe I have to be in Durban, I have to be in Cape Town, but they can't afford to offer me that amount. So I have to do something else in order for me to generate that money, in order for me to end up being there in Cape Town or Devon. So it is not easy for me to generate that money in a short space of time.
The high unemployment spells bad news for the tax base and government finances.
Already the fiscus is struggling to collect money from individuals. It will continue to struggle. I have no doubt that we are already overtaxed on the income tax side for individuals. And we are going to, we're going to be between a rock and a hard place. We're going to run bigger budget deficits.
Unemployment will likely rise even further in the third quarter as a result of the riots that engulfed parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in the month of July. This led to damaged businesses not being able to operate, and while some are in the process of rebuilding, others may not be able to reopen. Gloria Sefakomusi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Let's welcome our first guest, Business South Africa CEO, Cass Kuvadia. Cass, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Not the kind of situation we would have ideally wanted to find ourselves in as a country, but one that was not completely unexpected.
Oh, yeah, good evening. Thanks for having me, and good evening to your listeners. Yeah, look, these are, they're frightening figures, they're depressing figures, but for a number of reasons, and it sounds a bit callous to actually say this, but for a number of reasons not unexpected. The one is obviously COVID, and COVID has had a significant impact on a number of sectors. A number of sectors that we consider to be job-creating sectors like tourism, hospitality, accommodation, and lots of, we employ people around sports events, around arts and culture and so on, and all of that has actually taken a downturn as a result of COVID. But the reality is that even pre-COVID, our economy was in recession.
Exactly.
And so this is not surprising because our economy just isn't growing. And without a growing economy, you can't create jobs. So, we go back to the same old, arguments that it's not ideally businesses should be employing people. Businesses will employ people if they have the opportunity to grow. New businesses have the opportunity to actually open and develop without too much red tape. We have an environment for investment. And it's those same discussion that we've been having for the last 3 years that are on the table yet again, whenever the job figures come out. So, unfortunately, it's not rocket science. We don't have the luxury and the time to debate what sort of economic structure we want. We are in a globalized economy. We are less than 1% in GDP terms of global GDP. We have to grow our economy within the context of the rules of the global economy, and we need to manage that as best as we can to ensure inclusive growth and an inclusive economy. And those are the discussions we need to have.
Business, organized business, that is, organized labor, civil society, the government has been meeting regularly at Ned Lake, where you have this platform where you get to iron out and even get into the detail of some of these problems. Are you not finding one another?
Well, look, you're right. We're having lots of discussions. There's lots of meetings at Ned Lake. But I think that, we can't have these discussions, in our view, in situations which land up to be mass meetings, for want of a better term, where we land up with 20, 30, 40 people in a meeting from different stakeholders, and to try and discuss the difficult issues we need to discuss. What we're going to have to do across the board, if we're going to make an impact on joblessness, if we're going to make an impact on poverty and inequality, by growing our economy, there's going to have to be trade-offs and compromises across the board. And trade-offs and compromises don't get discussed in meetings of 20, 30, 40 people. What we need is, 5, 6 people from labor, 5, 6 people from business, 5, 6 people from government, senior leadership, to actually sit down over a period of time, over a few days, and thresh this out and talk about what are the critical interventions needed in the economy, what low-hanging fruits can we actually leverage off now, what's the role of government in pulling the levers that only they can pull, and then on the back of all of that, how does business and labor reach some sort of a compact within the context of the sort of joblessness figures we have, within the context of the social problems we have, and the discussion has got to be, what do we need to do to encourage businesses to employ people? That's a discussion we need to have. Without violating the rights of workers, without going into the sorts of situation where we mistreat workers and pay them less than living wages. But we need the issue has got to be what do we need to do to enable businesses to employ people.
Sounds very commonsensical an approach to me, and I'm sure to our viewers. But what's stopping that from happening? Have such proposals been tabled before? And if so, what have been the responses from the other social partners?
Well, we as BUSA, as one of the conveners of Business for South Africa, we presented a post-COVID economic recovery strategy to government in July last year. Since then, we've been having these discussions at Ned Lake. We haven't had, unfortunately, a bilateral with government on the economic recovery strategy we presented. I think that we do need, I think business and government also needs to sit down bilaterally, just as government and, for instance, COSATU sits down bilaterally to talk through issues. I think business and government need to sit down bilaterally. We need to look at what business is putting on the table. Government needs to critique that with us. And then they can have a bilateral with the neighbor as well. And then the three of us talk. I think that there are a number of problems in the country. We've got problems in the ruling party that have an impact on government. We have a cabinet that hasn't been aligned behind the president. The president needs to ensure that his cabinet is aligned behind decisions the president needs to make as president of this country, not the president of the ANC, as president of this country, as he did, for instance, when he took the decision and announced to increase the ceiling for embedded energy to 100 kilowatts. Those are the sorts of decisions we need. That's the sort of leadership we need from government. And I think behind that sort of leadership, we can all coalesce at different parts of society to actually make things happen and to actually make a difference. But the situation we are in currently does put a significant part of the onus on government. And I think government needs to show that sort of leadership. And we as business stand ready to actually join government in doing the hard work under that sort of leadership.
But the president has been promising since day one that what you're saying is actually the approach that he wants to follow. I mean, the cabinet we are talking about is a cabinet that he himself chose without the interference, of those that may have been there before, those who may have prevented or precluded him from, putting a signature to the kind of executive that he wants to have. An opportunity arose recently where he moved people around. So that's the person who should be showing the leadership that is required. Why are we still talking about or complaining about an executive that is, not doing, what it is supposed to do? Because it can only mean one thing, that he either hasn't given them the marching orders, or there are people within his executive that are prepared to defy him, or at the very least not cooperate with him, which should send more alarm bells.
Yeah, look, I think the root causes of that problem lies in the ruling party, because I think that because of the ideological, or not even the ideological battles, I think just the factional battles in the ruling party, that had an impact on the president's ability to actually play the role as president of South Africa. I think that too many decisions, there isn't a strong enough line between the party and the state. Too many decisions are taken in the party that actually impact on government, like deployment and so on. And I think that we need leadership in government now that says that national interests have got to be put high up on the agenda, and that's got to trump party interest. Now, it's easy for me to say. I'm not in the hot seat. But that's a sort of courageous leadership that is needed at the moment. That's a sort of crisis we are in at the moment. And I don't know what more needs to happen to actually impress upon all of us the very, very serious crisis our country is in across a broad range of fronts, not only the economic front, but across a broad range of fronts. And courageous leadership is needed from across the board, be it business, be it labor, be it government, be it community groups. But I think the leadership has got to come from government. So because it's government's role to actually ensure, one, that firstly its executive is behind the president, and then it's government's role to actually talk to the critical stakeholders and try to get them onto the same page as the government of this country. And we hope that that happens. We urge that that happens, and we are prepared to put our shoulders to the wall in that sort of arrangement.
Well, we have a minister who is, or supposedly, responsible for employment in this country. In the 2 months plus that we've had this show, we've asked him to come on, even if it's just to, take us through the thinking, even if things aren't or haven't been done yet. And he has refused to come on. Even today, after the release of these figures, short while ago, in fact, we checked whether there was even a statement from that department and ministry that will at least, say or assure South Africans that the member of the executive responsible for employment in this country takes this issue very seriously. But we are told that that statement will come in another day or two. Now, we are here, and obviously we can't keep on, whinging and moaning about these things, which then takes me back to, if you remember, at the height of state capture and all the shenanigans going on within the ruling party, there's a point at which, whether it was business organizations, civil society organizations, trade unions, churches, everyone then stood up and said, enough is enough. We can't keep watching or talking forever about these problems. It's time we did something about this. And indeed, things were done which have brought us where we are right now. Shouldn't we be tapping into those energies, alliances, that took us, that at least moved us from where we were to where we are now? Because we can't just keep complaining. There comes a time when we now all need to say, come on, guys, you're clearly not showing leadership here, so, let's go for broke now.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely space for that. I mean, there are organizations like Protect Our Democracy, there are organizations like the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation and others that are doing good work in the sort of corruption space, in the governance space and so on. I think religious leaders have made their voices heard in those spaces. We actually cooperating very well, and we've developed some sort of a front to get the vaccine rollout sorted out and to actually encourage people to vaccinate. And perhaps we need to leverage of that sort of an alliance that's been built around the vaccines to also begin to make their voices heard on the socio-economy, if you like. And look, I think that, let me be clear, that we convinced that if President Ramaphosa leads us as president of the country, I think that a broad cross-section of society will actually be behind him. I think there is some level of faith in the president as president of this country, but at this point in time, I think it's his party that's actually dragging him down. And so, I think that if we can come together as society, religious leaders, civil society, I think it's in all our interests. Even labor and business that very often have differences. on this, it's got to be in even labor's and business common interest to enable as many jobs to be created and to encourage businesses to actually employ people. And we need to do what we need to do to encourage business to employ people. It's no good saying, why isn't business employing people? If businesses could employ people to actually grow, to increase their businesses, be profitable, they do that. That's what businesses do. They're not doing it because we don't have the environment in this country for a whole range of reasons. We have regulatory uncertainty, and we need to actually sort those issues out so that businesses are encouraged to invest and to actually employ people and to grow this economy. And I think that that's something that should be in all of society's interest. And so, an alliance of that sort, and this is not speaking in a negative sense, a positive, constructive coming together of different interests in society to begin to push in one direction with one focus, and that is to increase investment, grow an inclusive economy, employ people, pay taxes, and have a government that utilizes those taxes in an honest, efficient manner to actually deliver services to people.
Kaskovadia, thanks very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
He's the CEO of a Business South Africa. Food for thought. There, should we elevate, in fact, why shouldn't we, the issue of economic recovery and the creation of jobs to the same position we took corruption and maladministration, lack of accountability not too long ago, which in the end saw President Jacob Zuma losing his seat at the top of the executive of the country. That's the question we perhaps need to look into. After the break, losing the fight, organizations that have been highlighting and breaking the barriers as they try to help young people and women talk to us about what needs to be done to help especially young people and women. Don't go away. Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, we're looking at the latest quarterly labor force survey for the second quarter of 2021. It paints a rather grim picture of unemployment since the survey, perhaps in fact the worst picture we've seen since the survey's introduction in 2008. It shows that 34.4% of South Africans are now unemployed, which translates into over 7 million people. The number of employed South Africans, on the other hand, has decreased by 54,000 people from what it was in the first quarter of the year. Young people are the worst affected. 64% of young people aged between the ages of 15 and 24 are now unemployed. Over 3 million young people aged between 15 and 24 are unemployed, not in school, and they are not in training either. Leanne Emery is from Yes for Youth, and Zengeziwe Msimang is from an organization called Harombe. Good evening to both of you, ladies. Thanks very much for your time. Just went through your minds, knowing what you know, and the efforts, of course, you've been engaged in helping young people and women get employed. The minute you heard about the figures that were announced today, Zengeziwe, what went through your mind?
I think there's a lot that went through my mind, but the first thing that really popped up was we've been speaking around how we address these issues. I think there's a number of interventions that have been put into place, but it was a stark reality of how much more there still is to do. I think it really showed us that we have so far to go in terms of addressing this. And the other thing that really sprung to my mind and what I saw was that once again, we're looking at statistics where we have young women and women generally and young women specifically that come out the worst for these statistics. So you find young women that are just so greatly impacted, negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, yes, but just generally, all of these barriers that women face are still there and they're not getting better. And this is kind of what the stats showed us today.
Leanne, your thoughts when you first heard about these stats?
So I think, you've mentioned some of the stats on the screen earlier. For us, the stat we often look at is the expanded unemployment rate, particularly between the ages of 15 and 24. Now, these people really should be actively looking for work, and that the expanded unemployment rate is around 75%. So if we think about our economy and as a nation, we are leaving an entire generation behind again. And as we at the Youth Employment Service are really proud of the work we're doing, 60,000 jobs in 137 weeks with our corporate partners, but we really need to bandy together. The time is now, and the work we do is more important now than ever. And as a nation, we really need to collaborate between the private and the public sector to get youth into jobs. I think the sad reality is that we weren't particularly shocked by these figures. Bloomberg reported South Africa as the worst unemployment rate in the world out of 82 countries. And I think it's so difficult sometimes to contextualize what do these figures actually mean. But we see on the ground every day what putting one young person into a job means, and just that we are more energized now than ever to get the work that we do done.
Zengeziwe, talk us through very briefly what you guys do.
Well, at Harombe, we basically look for solutions to the global, but in this case, the South African challenge of youth unemployment. So our focus is definitely on the youth. And what we do is research, looking at what are the barriers that young people face in order to kind of look at how we then solve for them. How do we reduce the barriers that young people face in terms of entering the labor market? I think another important thing that Harombe does, and this is all of the speakers so far have kind of spoken to the importance of public-private partnerships and of kind of working together at this point. And what we do is work very closely with government, with the civil society, and with various other stakeholders in order to kind of look at how we address these challenges. And one of those ways is through sayouth.mobi, which is basically, and we call it the network of networks. You have so many young people who are unable to access networking opportunities. How do young people begin to kind of pathway into the into employment? So what we do at Harombe, and President Ramaphosa actually launched the SA Youth Network on the 16th of June, on Youth Day. And what that network does is bring together young people. It's zero-rated, so that allows for young people to get onto the network without paying. And looking at barriers again, one of them is the cost of just data, right? We've heard so much about the cost of data. So this is a zero-rated network that allows young people to be matched with opportunities that are in their area. And I think what we're seeing now is that we need to start looking at how business and how civil society really come onto this platform so that we know how large the supply is, right? We've seen the statistics. So we need to make sure that those youth, once they're on this network, are able to be matched, to not just work opportunities, but also opportunities that keep them engaged. So I think a lot of what we do is pulling together private sector, pulling together civil society, and working with government in order to create different pathways for young people to really get into the job market and stay there.
How do these young people plug onto your network? How does it work practically?
So practically, I was saying it's zero rated. So it's like an app. So it's a platform on which once you get onto the network, there's various different pathways that you would be able to take. So if you are looking at opportunities, and we focus a lot on the formal sector, but there's many other ways in which young people can get busy, get engaged, and start to grow working opportunities for themselves. So it basically, once you're onto that system, we find different ways in order to match young people with those opportunities. And I think a good example of this, of really coming together and working together, is the project that we did with DBE. And in a short number of weeks, we managed to place 300,000 young people as teachers' assistants. Vuyo, I think you might remember that project. And it was really in response to COVID-19. And there was this need that was identified for young people who could serve as teachers' assistants. And I think what's critical about the network and about the platform is that those young people were not only placed, but they were placed close to where they are. So this platform lets us know who the young people are and also where they are, so they can get linked with opportunities that are closest to them. Because going back and looking at the barriers we talk about, another one of those barriers is transport. So I think at Harombe, what we're trying to do is really identify all the different barriers and then find innovative ways that include various stakeholders to address them.
Just very quickly, give or take, how many people are now in your system?
We have hundreds of thousands of people on the system, and this is exactly why it is so important for us to partner, because the supply, as the stats show us, far outweigh the demand. So we have a situation where we have hundreds of thousands of young people who are on our system, and once they're on our system, they need to get matched with those opportunities. And I think Kaz spoke earlier about how within the formal sector, they're struggling with growth and they're struggling to be able to employ young people. So I think that element of ensuring that the supply isn't the problem is the demand. So we need to get government as well. How are they going to get online and ensure that they also have jobs that are available for young people? So it's not just one sector. I think, Vuyo, one thing that I just need to highlight is scale. The only way we're going to fix this is at scale. It cannot be something of a number of jobs here, a couple of jobs there.
True that, yeah.
It has to be scaled.
Leanne, on your part, what have you guys been up to?
So the Youth Employment Service is a business-led NPO, and what we do is we try and connect exactly what Zingaziwe was speaking to now, is that we're on the demand side. So we speak to corporate clients and they sponsor work opportunities for youth. So in 137 weeks, we've managed to get 1,600 corporate partners on board, and they have sponsored 60,000 work opportunities for young people. These young people then are taken through a 12-month work opportunity in numerous sectors, and they then are de-risked. So at the end of the 1 year, they receive a CV and a reference letter, and they're either absorbed into the organization that hired them, or they start their own businesses, or we work with companies like Harombe to find pathways for them. So there's numerous ways that we work around that. And where the collaboration with government comes in for, yes, we are not government funded, but what we have is this policy. So if businesses come on board and they sponsor work opportunities for young people, they receive 1 or 2 levels up on their BEE scorecard.
What have been some of your, shall we say, frustrations?
So I think, the biggest challenge for us is in an economy like this that is shedding jobs, is to convince corporates to come on board, join the movement. And I think that the willingness is there for Business South Africa. There's no lack of willingness, but when businesses are in some of the circumstances that they have been lately, it is always a more difficult sell. But with that being said, we've been extremely fortunate. As I said, 1,600 corporate partners to date. And I think one of the challenges, as mentioned before, is this idea of, we're not going to be able to solve this unemployment crisis if we simply put youth in more jobs in Sandton and Cape Town CBD. We have a massive structural and spatial inequality issue in South Africa. So one of the ways that we've aimed to address that, and it's working well for so many of our partners, is that we have partnered with 31 implementation partners, and these are in high impact jobs in communities. So healthcare, conservation, education, really exciting jobs, SMME development, and these young people are then placed in communities, because obviously the transportation issues, especially for young women who want to be close to their families, and 90% of our youth have dependents. This is a solution that we find often works well for our clients who want a turnkey solution, who want to have the impact, but they can't necessarily increase their headcount, and they want to make a meaningful impact in communities. So, similar to the work that's being done at Harombe, we're trying to identify what are the barriers and how do we open these. Similarly, South Africa, from a supply and demand point of view, obviously from a demand point of view, the jobs have been created in the first economy. We have automation, fourth industrial revolution, and the jobs have been created there, but around, more than 50% of young people leaving matric do so without a matric certificate. So trying to find partners and jobs for young people that are not necessarily requiring a high level of skill to begin with, but that gets them to break that experience trap, and that experience trap that 8 million South Africans faced. I can't get a job without experience, and I can't get experience without a job. And that's why we have to have incentives, and we have to have interventions in order to stimulate that job creation at scale.
In a short while, I'll be speaking to Dr. Seth Cooper, who is a psychologist. We'll be looking at the psychosocial impact, of the situation, or worsening, I should say, situation that we are in on South Africans, but more specifically young people. Just from your engagements, because obviously none of you can really accommodate the numbers, of young people who really need to be assisted. Just tell us with some of the, the people you have encountered, how they felt, how they feel, what they have expressed to you as, of course, you continue to hit stumbling blocks in the sense that you are not able, to do for them what they need, to be done. How have they felt? What are some of the things that you've seen and heard? Zangeziwe?
Well, I think the sentiment has been that young women that we've engaged with are, and I'm looking specifically at young women here, and the young women that we've engaged with, they feel that they're less protected. They don't feel that they're working in environments within which they're safe, and I think, or operating environments in which they're safe. And I think that when we look at some of the interventions that we think about, we don't think about them from a specifically gendered lens, right? So we end up with a situation where you've got young women who are feeling particularly disengaged, and you've got young women who are not able to access opportunities, and this has a roll-on effect. I think one should also keep in mind that when you're looking at women, you're also looking at caregivers. And there are all these gendered penalties that come along with being female, which we've seen happen during the COVID pandemic, where women really ended up last and were not really taken care of. So I think looking through a gendered lens, then you begin to see just how disadvantaged these women are in so many different ways. And this has an impact, obviously, not just on the one individual, but on entire communities. Okay. Women are caregivers. Women are mothers of young children. So it's not the psychological impact only on the women, but the fact that, importantly, it reverberates throughout the community.
Leanne?
Yeah, I mean, it's really heartbreaking when you speak to young people that are trying to remain positive in such a difficult environment. And I think often we see the difference when a young person does receive an opportunity, and the difference that makes immediately, then the ripple effects across families and communities. One of the things that we do in the YES program is that every young person receives a smartphone, and on that smartphone there are digital training apps, and these are psycho and behavioral training modules that young people, just because a lot of young people, they haven't had role models that have been working. They're just some of these basic things that a lot of us take for granted. And one of the big things that we speak to on these learning apps is this idea of growth mindset, because I think when you are stuck in this unemployment trap, there's this sense of, you can't grow, it's not possible. And part of what we do when young people do start the program is to try and shift that mindset, that psychological trap that so many young people are in, that you can have a growth mindset, you are able to, it is possible, but it's certainly not easy.
Leanne Emery, thanks very much. Thanks to both of you for coming through.
Thank you. Good to
Leanne is from Yes for Youth. Zengeziwe is from Harombe. After the break, we look at the psychosocial impact of rising unemployment on South Africans, especially young people. South Africa's unemployment rate has reached a new record high, with no evidence things are going to change anytime soon. Earlier, our colleagues spoke to economist and researcher Duma Gubule, who wasn't too optimistic about whether things are going to change anytime soon, but also saying even if they do, the space we were in before is not a good one to be in either. Take a listen.
We had a crisis before COVID, when our economy did not grow in per capita terms between 2009 and 2019. Then we had 2020, where our economy collapsed by 7%. This year, there will be a technical rebound from the lows. And then after that, we're going to revert to our pre-pandemic low growth rate unless government changes its economic policies. And let me just say one last thing. I've done some projections in terms of until 2030. The government says it will take until 2023 for us to reach 2019 levels of GDP growth. If you add population growth, it could be 2025. So on this trajectory that we're on, we're going to have a second lost decade in terms of economic development. And that will result in repeated social unrest, instability, and eventually the government will have to use repression to keep the people under control. This is a serious crisis. We've never had anything like this in post-apartheid history. I don't know what will make government change their mind. The policies have failed repeatedly. They keep doubling down on these policies that failed. Structural reform, privatization, deregulation, liberalization. There's nowhere in the world Every single document, whether it's from National Treasury or IMF, shows that those policies do not deliver growth in the short term, and they have a cost in the short term. So why should they even be on the table?
Wow, not encouraging words there from Duma Gqubule. We're now joined by the president of the Pan-African Psychology Union, Professor Seth Cooper. Prof, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. One can only imagine, you know, the impacts the state we are in has and is going to continue to have, especially on young people who are being told, as Duma was telling us, that we, you know, looking at another lost decade.
Well, you know, we have a system where there's structural deprivation and institutional deprivation. By structural, I'm talking about the very form and modality of socioeconomic relations that tend to ignore and indeed often harm the majority of our people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. And this is exemplified by health, economic, gender, and other disparities, particularly racial. Our rules, laws, official, largely failed policies result in and support a continued unfair advantage to a small number of direct beneficiaries of our largely extraction economy, while there's unfair or benign neglect of the majority. And the institutional deprivation is embedded as normal practice within our society. That's exemplified by all sorts of discriminations in our criminal justice, employment, which we're discussing now, health, housing, political power, and education, amongst other issues. And yet we have so many ministries purporting to deal with creating opportunities that surprisingly ignore the vast majority of our people, and many just simply give up trying. There's deep patterns of socioeconomic inequality and disadvantage after the Rainbow Miracle of 1994. And there is that entrapment in a grinding dead end. Despite our much vaunted Bill of Rights, we indeed experience a loss of dignity. Can you imagine being in that position month after month, and then it goes into years, and then you don't hit the statistics anymore? There's a loss of dignity, a key point in our Constitution, Bill of Rights. Loss of self-respect, self-confidence. There's a sense of loss over one's life and circumstances, and then loss of self-esteem, our sense of identity, and importantly also loss of belonging, being part of society, community. There's almost a removal from the usual processes that ought to happen in a society like ours, which ought to be vibrant and engaging. And then there's lowered perception of personal efficacy. You lose control and hence psychological well-being and health deteriorates. There is also,
When you listen or watch the people you've just mentioned who are supposedly in charge and who should be taking care of various aspects of our lives, do you get a sense that, one, there is a commitment to doing what they are supposed to do, or what they have been elected to do, number one? Number two, whether they feel the urgency with which, you know, they need to be treating with, they need to be treating these things. Are they alive to some of the things that Duma Gqubule was talking about? That we have a crisis, the worst crisis of post-apartheid South Africa. Do you see that in the things that they say, in how they conduct themselves?
No, I don't see that, unfortunately. And I did not think I would be saying this, but I think they've lost touch with the reality of the situation and probably have very little innovative ideas on how to move us out of this dead end that they've created, not the majority of our law-abiding citizens out there who still wait for something to happen. They have lost compassion. They indeed, I get a sense, are going through the motion. This has become another job for many of them. There isn't that zeal and commitment to want to see a real transformation in our society. But come election period, there is obviously all those empty mouthings, and within a week or so after that election, people are back in square one. The extent of dependency is massive, whereas our institutions need to be real to the fact that jobs are just not going to be created without people getting involved in that pursuit.
Yep.
Our institutions need to realign on that score.
You know, my previous guests were using words like psychological trap. You know, these are people who have been dealing with young people, trying to place them in jobs, trying to help them cope better. They were also talking about, you know, role models who are not working, some of them who never worked. In other words, unlike you and I, who may have different role models, you know, these are children who grew up, you know, knowing, like, never having seen their parents working, or there's no one in the house who actually works. You know, what future and what does that do to their mindset?
Well, it's soul destroying. That's a reality, and you know what? It's excessively been growing in our society, and in the early 80s, we talked of, are we creating a lost generation? We've seen lost generations and very little realistic ideas on how we're going to change this. There's lots of talk shops, but no action. And indeed, we've got the remains of the old economy of the past in some new hands, but the majority of people don't have a stake in the present, and there's very little hope for that future, which looks bleak. An entire generation born post-democracy indeed don't have the examples of success, the role models, because the majority have significant people in their environment who are progressively out of work, growing up in barren shack settlements and townships that are indeed soul destroying. They grow up without any hope that things will change. So the circumstances are very significant, and we're surrounded. You know, South Africa is surrounded by countries where, put together, we comprise the top 20 countries of unemployment, part of the top 20 countries with unemployment. And unemployed people elsewhere, for instance, in OECD countries, particularly in Europe, receive reasonably good basic income, which cannot be said for the majority in our country. That issue of basic income grant and taking people out of desperation needs to start happening.
Professor Cooper, thanks very much for your time this evening. He is the president of the Pan-African Psychology Union. That's why we're going to leave it this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock sharp. Have a good night.